Life of Christ. We're going to be in section 37, and this is week, I believe, 6 here. I think they're ahead of me by 1 week, so 6. So anyhow, we're in the winter trimester.
I've been rewatching them, and I'm on week 4.
Okay.
So there was at least one more after that.
Yeah, okay. This is 6, okay. So anyhow, winter trimester here, week 6. And this is going to be section 37. And this section just, it occupied a lot of my time this week studying, because it just, let's read John 4, 43 through 45. And when we are here, what has just happened in this storyline? It was the Lord going up to Samaria, and he has the encounter with the woman at the well in Samaria, and then they ask him to stay there for a couple of days. He stays there for 2 days, and they believe in Jesus, and they call him the Savior of the world. And now he's making his way up from there to Galilee. And so now we pick up with verse 43 in chapter 4 of John. After the 2 days, he went forth from there into Galilee. For Jesus himself testified that a prophet has no honor in his own country. So when he came to Galilee, the Galileans received him, having seen all the things that he did in Jerusalem at the feast. For they themselves also went to the feast. So I just have to ask, does that make any sense to anybody? Because it did make any sense to me.
In what sense?
In any sense.
It seems like it stops right in the middle of a story.
Yeah, I'm reading this, and I'm like, I don't understand what's going on here. Does anybody else feel like they don't understand what's happening here? He's leaving, and then he goes into his own country, but he gets no honor, but he's also received here. And I'm like, I had to read this over and over and over, and I had to read the commentaries on this, because it just didn't make any sense to me. But I think I may have got it figured out, and we're going to try and give it a go. Yes?
Was it maybe starting to show acceptance by people that you wouldn't normally say, maybe the Gentiles, and then but a continued hesitance and stuff from the people of his own town?
I think you are pretty close. There's definitely been a acceptance that has taken place in Samaria about Christ, but now we're moving into Galilee. So what sort of acceptance are we talking about here? And I think the key is the book and the narrative that we're in right now is John. But one of the problems is that we are always trying to, all of the commentators and all of the harmonies, and everybody's trying to force John into different areas within the ministry of Christ that fits somehow into the synoptic timeline here. So here's the John 4 paradox. He himself had testified that a prophet has no honor in his own town, in his own hometown. Yet when he arrived, the Galileans welcomed him. So Jesus has no honor in his country, and this country is Galilee. We're not talking about Judea here. He's not calling the region he's leaving, which was Judea, and he came up through Samaria. He wouldn't call Samaria his own country. Lots of commentators say, well, he was talking about Judea. Well, he's not talking about Judea. He's leaving there, entering into Galilee. And so John plainly tells us that Jesus himself had testified that a prophet has no honor in his own country. So in this context, this country that he's speaking of is Galilee. It's not Judea. And the reason I put this up here is because the commentators have a difficult time with this verse. How is it that he's welcomed in his own country, but he's also not honored in his own country at the same time? this is the paradox. And so it looks very contradictory when you're reading it initially, and it is contradictory if we don't understand what this welcoming actually is. So we have to remember the timeline, and here again, it's going to come up because time and time again we see the need to place John 4 and 5 outside of the synoptic timeline. And here it is again. The passage is explicit here. He, Jesus, has no honor in his own country. We know that. Galilee is not honoring him, yet he's received. But the passage explicitly states why there is a reception. They had seen all the great things he had done in Jerusalem at the feast, for they had gone there as well. Which feast is he talking about here? The Passover that he was just at, that he came up from Judea through Samaria to Galilee.
Now, that was after he cleansed the temple.
And this is right after he cleansed the temple, yes.
That's the things that we're talking about as far as what he'd done at the feast.
So, the acceptance is, and the recognition of Jesus is explicitly tied back to those who saw what he did in Jerusalem at the time of the feast. Do we at all remember what was going on with those who saw the things that Jesus did at the time of the feast? Was there another reference to this at all? There was. Does this sound familiar? Many believed in his name, observing his signs which he was doing, but Jesus was not entrusting himself to them, for he knew all men. This was in John chapter 2, verse 23 and 24, which is a reference back to the feast and what he was doing in Jerusalem, taking over the temple, overturning the tables and all these things. Recall the moment. Jesus confronts the temple abominations during this first Passover. He turns over the money tables and confronts the sellers of animals. Then he witnesses many in Jerusalem believing in his name because of the signs which he was doing. But Jesus immediately recognizes this is a belief based in his signs and not in his person. And Jesus plainly says this in John chapter 2. He does not entrust himself to these people, even though it's said that they believed in him. But they're not believing in him as the Messiah, him as this person. He does not entrust himself to them. So these in Jerusalem in John chapter 2 have accepted Jesus as a sign worker. And we went over this. We talked about this. But he is a miracle worker is how they see Jesus. And they do not see him as a Messiah, which explains precisely why there was an interaction with Nicodemus immediately following this event. So John records this event taking place. They're accepting him based off of his signs, and they see him as this miracle worker, and Nicodemus sneaks out in the night and goes, how are we supposed to see these things? And Jesus says, and Jesus doesn't entrust himself to them, and Nicodemus comes out, how are we supposed to see these things? And Jesus says what? You must be born again. That's what he says to Nicodemus. And he goes through this entire discourse about being born again. This isn't about seeing signs. So, after that discourse with Nicodemus, he makes his way back up to Galilee by way of Samaria. And who receives him in Galilee? In Galilee. After he goes through Samaria, who receives him in Galilee?
The ones who had been at the feast saw the signs.
Exactly. The same type of people who saw all the things, this is John 4:45, all the things that he did in Jerusalem at the feast. For they themselves also went to the feast. So were they true worshipers, or were they accepting Jesus as the Messiah? No. No. Not according to Jesus, who said of those people, he was not entrusting himself to them. That's Jesus. That's his words here. That was his reaction to these people. So this paradox is resolved through a proper reading. Jesus is not honored in his own country because they did not accept his person. They saw him as a sign worker or a miracle worker of some sort, but not as the Messiah. This is why Jesus did not entrust himself to them. And then it goes on to explain what true belief looks like with this contrast between being born again and this sign belief or this miracle working belief. We must see this. The very next, the harmonies break this up. They break up 43 through 45 as one section, and then we're going to see here in a moment, they jump to another section, which shouldn't be there. And then they come back to 46 and the sign at Cana, the second sign that takes place at Cana. Why? There's no reason why we should be breaking this record up or this narrative flow of John up. And by doing so, it causes confusion. So we must see that what I'm saying here is correct, because if we read a little bit further in the narrative, we see something that Jesus says that reveals this entire thing. He says, unless you people see signs and wonders, you simply will not believe. Who's he talking to? These people that he's just been confronting with that are worshiping him for this miracle-working signs and wonders and all these things, but they're not recognizing him as the Messiah. And Jesus himself plainly says this. We can't separate these two events into different sections within the life of Christ. Okay, this is why I'm suggesting this has to be a pre-Galilean ministry. It has to be. And I have been studying this in great fervor, I would say, for the last 5 weeks. And I have been trying to figure out why there is an insistence on placing these events within the timeline of the synoptic ministry, of the Galilean ministry. And I cannot come up with a reason. Everybody that you read about this, it's assumed. It's assumed that this is in it. It's assumed that this is in there. There's no coherent answer as to why. Why do we put all of these events within the synoptic timeline? I don't know why everybody wants to do that. I've still not come up with a good answer for that. And the reason is, in my opinion, is that it's always been assumed that these are within the same timeline and that you have to harmonize all these events. I'm not harmonizing anything here. We haven't even gotten into harmony yet. I'm just reading John for what John's been saying here. There's no need to place these events inside the synoptic timeline.
And you're saying that the synoptic timeline is yet future.
The synoptic timeline is still yet future. John 1 through 5. John 1 through 4 for sure happens before the synoptic timeline. The woman at the well does not happen in the synoptic timeline. And I'll show you guys this why in a moment. But that is the burden of proof that is on this in the synoptic timeline is definitely on those who say that this is in the synoptic timeline. And I'll show you why in a moment. Because there's a very critical moment that's very well documented that takes place that we have to see. So if this were the formal launch of the Galilean ministry described in the synoptics, the no honor statement would make little sense. But if this is an early sign-driven reception prior to the kingdom proclamation phase, the tension dissolves immediately. Most commentators place this event or acceptance at the beginning of the Galilean ministry. So everybody that I've read is going to place 43 through 45 at the beginning of the Galilean ministry. It is not. It's just not. And if you place it there, you have to reconcile this issue. How is he have no honor in his country, but he's also received? That's the dilemma that every commentator has to come up with. And they have to try and resolve this issue because they're forcing it to be within this Galilean ministry. If you remove it from the Galilean ministry, it makes perfect sense. And if you see, and if you don't separate 43 through 45 and then enter another text, try and harmonize another text in there, and you just keep reading it, we see that Jesus himself is plainly telling these people that their belief is only in signs. They're only worshiping about his signs and his wonders. Reading the record of John is intended from chapter to chapter, the way he wrote it, it becomes clear that those accepting Jesus in Galilee are the same type of people present in Jerusalem when he would not entrust himself to them. Additionally, we see why John records the second sign. He is showing these people who only believe in signs, he is the Messiah. How do we know that's what the people want? Jesus plainly says, unless you people see signs and wonders, you simply will not believe. Yes.
A geography question. So, when the Bible says Galilee, it's talking about a region.
Region, yep.
It's not a city, it's a region.
Correct.
But then when he talks about Cana, he's talking about a city, not a region. Is that correct?
That's correct. So,
But is Cana within Galilee?
yes.
So, when he's speaking here, before he gets to Cana, where is he?
Well, he's moving up from Samaria north to Galilee, moving through Galilee into Cana.
He's, in 43, he says, he went forth from there into Galilee.
Yeah.
So seems like he's in Galilee before he's gotten to Cana.
Well, he after the 2 days, what 2 days? Where's he moving from?
Oh, yeah, where was he? He was in Samaria?
Samaria.
So he's Samaria, and then he's moving into Galilee.
Mm-hmm.
But then while he's moving, he encounters these people that have been at the feast
Yes.
somewhere.
Yeah.
We don't know where that is exactly.
I would say this is in Cana. So he came again to Cana of Galilee.
So the people he's talking about who saw him in Jerusalem earlier, they're in Cana?
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
They would have had 3 days to sit there and go down to Jericho, cross over the Jordan, run up north, past Samaria, and back into Galilee to their destination of Cana.
Let me
While
I need you to
also
come up here.
staying in Samaria.
Is that being recommended?
Yes. So I might actually be this one right here. No, I need one before this. No, that's not it. 37, 30. I should have a 38.
I know he's got maps.
Well, yeah, the Galilee up here, Samaria, but they did have, like last week when we talked about it, cross over Jordan.
Yeah.
they
Yeah,
had to
I
go
need a
around
different
and
one.
cross back.
That's all right. I'm just going to put it on my
Whereas
phone.
Christ just went straight
Maybe you never uploaded that one to us?
and had time to take a 2-day break while everybody
Should I
else
just do it?
I just uploaded it, no.
got along.
39.
Yeah, it actually is. There's Nazareth up here.
Well, in
Jerusalem
46,
way
it
down
says,
here.
therefore he came again into
Right near, even with the top of the Dead Sea, the Jews. And Sea of Galilee in that region.
Okay.
See, here's where Samaria is. So it's quite a ways up there. And I'm wondering if the Galilee didn't have kind of a stigma because of things that were said about it.
We're good. Yep. Thank you.
Because from Jerusalem, it was separated by Samaria.
Yeah. So when you have in the nation of Israel, and I'm not even going to draw it because I'll draw it. I'll try. Here's Israel, okay? Down here's Jerusalem. This is going to be in Judea, okay? Now, this region just north between, here's the Sea of Galilee, the Jordan River, okay? Here's the Jordan River. Here's where John the Baptist is baptizing. And here's Perea up here. And then here is Galilee. Well, Galilee's going to be over here to include the Sea of Galilee. Perea is going to be up over in this section. This is Samaria. This is Galilee.
And Cana's about halfway up.
And Cana's like right here. Here's Cana. Here's Nazareth down here, I believe. Here's Capernaum up here, right by the Sea of Galilee. Okay, and then here's Jerusalem. So the typical route that they would take is they would cross over this Jordan River. They would go up through Perea, and then they'd come back into Galilee. But Jesus on this trip goes from Jerusalem through Samaria, and then comes straight up this way. Okay, so that's sort of it's probably a pretty to scale map right there about how that works. So anyways, if you ask me. But that's kind of like a rough, does that help maybe a little bit? So that's why, and Samaria is this region of tension between the Jews and the Samaritans that we talked about. So now we're going into section 39, all right, which should be really section 38 if we're going to go in this normal order here. So we're simply going to continue reading this section, which is John 4:46 through 54. This is where I don't see where I think the confusion is created. Everybody wants to place section 38 here, which is Matthew 4:17, which is Mark 1, which is Luke 4. And so from that time, Jesus began to preach and say, "Repent ye, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand." That's where almost every single person wants to place those passages where Jesus comes into Galilee. He's setting up this robust Galilean ministry at Capernaum. Repent, for the kingdom of heaven is hand. That's what Jesus is saying. That's what's beginning here right after John 4:43, 40 and through 45. And I say, no, it doesn't make sense. It's too early. Okay? So let's read. I don't know if I have. Yeah, I have a slide right here for it. So let's read 46 through, what was it, 54. Well, I guess it's the end of the chapter. So let's read this. Therefore, he came again to Cana of Galilee, where he had made the water wine. An official whose son was sick at Capernaum. When he heard that Jesus had come out of Judea into Galilee, he went to him and imploring him to come down and heal his son, for he was at the point of death. So Jesus said to him, "Yes, you people see signs and wonders you simply will not believe." The royal official said to him, "Sir, come down before my child dies." Jesus said to him, "Go, your son lives." The man believed the word that Jesus spoke to him and started off. As he was going down, his slaves met him, saying that his son was living. So he inquired of them the hour when he began to get better. Then they said to him, "Yesterday at the 7th hour the fever left him." So the father knew that it was at the hour in which Jesus said to him, "Your son lives." And he himself believed, in his whole household. This is, again, a second sign that Jesus performed when he had come out of Judea into Galilee. So we notice we've skipped section 38, which in these harmonies is the Messiah's authority to preach. Matthew 4:17, Mark 1, and Luke 4. So in all these harmonies, this is basically how the chronology flows. You have the acceptance in Galilee in John 4 is part of this Galilean ministry. Then the synoptics pick up in section 38 at his authority to preach. This is a forced chronology, however. Why? Why is this forced? Why can this not be the case? And this is the hinge point that we have to anchor ourselves into as it relates to the chronology and the timeline of the life of Christ.
It's not his time of rejection yet.
It's not his time of rejection. He hasn't been rejected yet, correct? One of the biggest indicators and markers that we can anchor ourselves in the life of Christ is the arrest of John the Baptist. It's very important that is a moment that the synoptics explicitly state as the beginning point of the Galilean ministry. So, in the John 4 trip to Galilee, John the Baptist has not been arrested. There is zero evidence within the Bible to suggest that the John 4 departure from Judea to Galilee is the same thing as the Matthew 4, Luke 4, and Mark 1 departure. There's zero evidence. The other synoptics plainly state, well, outside of Luke, but Luke does fill in the timeline by describing the result of him leaving, which is a robust Galilean ministry. So we know Luke is talking about the same period of time here. But Mark and Matthew are explicit. John the Baptist's arrest is what is the cause for Jesus leaving to Galilee. In Matthew 4, what is the cause? It is not John the Baptist's arrest. In fact, in Matthew 4, we can see that John the Baptist is not only not arrested, he's still very much actively ministering.
Are you saying Matthew or?
John.
You said Matthew.
Sorry.
John.
John 4. In John 4, all the harmonies want to place John 4 departure, 1 through 4, into the same time as Matthew 4, Luke 4, and Mark 1. All of those synoptic timelines are saying this is the departure from Judea into Galilee. They all are marked by John the Baptist's arrest, and they all are the beginning point for the Galilean ministry. John 4 is different. In John 4, he does depart Galilee, or does depart Judea into Galilee, but there's no arrest of John the Baptist. This is how we know this is a different timeline. And like I said, there's not only not an arrest in John 4, John the Baptist is still very actively ministering. So, this is why it's a forced chronology. This is why seeing these things and trying to harmonize these things is difficult, because they're trying to harmonize these things. Don't try and harmonize them. Just let the Bible read. Let the Bible flow naturally. There's no arrest in John 4. This is a different time. This is a different period, different departure, okay? We cannot overlook the fact that in this section 38, they occur after John the Baptist's arrest. So this is why I'm saying you cannot those passages in section 38 that I just talked about that are the beginning of the Galilean ministry, where Jesus says, repent for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Every commentator wants to put that right after this acceptance in Galilee. One, because they misunderstand this acceptance in Galilee, because they're not understanding that these are the same people that Jesus rebuked back in John 2, and he didn't give himself to them. It's the same people. And so we know this is not a true belief, which is why he has no honor in his own country, which is why that passage makes perfect sense if we understand it this way. But all of the commentators want to place these other section 38 passages right after that event where they're accepted. Why? Because it seems like he's accepted here. We are beginning this robust Galilean ministry. But why do we know that cannot be the case? Because in those passages, they all follow what event?
Arrest.
John the Baptist's arrest. John the Baptist hasn't been arrested yet in John 4. So it can't be there. We can't place it here. They must be at different times. Specifically what I mean, John 4 is prior to John the Baptist's arrest, like we just said.
What chapter does John record John the Baptist's arrest?
He doesn't record it. John does not record John the Baptist's arrest.
Well, I have a question though.
Okay.
Verse 46, why does he say he came therefore again? Why the again?
Well, has he been in Cana before?
Has he?
Yes. When?
When he turned water into wine at the wedding.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is.
See, this is the problem. This is the problem. This is what we've all been taught, right? This is what we've all been taught. Why does he say again here? Well, because we're trying to harmonize these events and going, well, this fits here, this fits there, this fits in the synoptic here, this fits in the synoptic there. No, it doesn't. It doesn't. And I welcome anybody that can show me why it should be. I've read everybody on this, and nobody's convincing, and nobody solves the problems. They all make more problems than just reading the book of John. Because the reality is that he does come again into Cana when he was changing the water into wine at his first sign. But that has nothing to do with the Galilean ministry. What does the water to wine event follow? It follows the baptism, then the temptation, then he comes back to the Jordan where John the Baptist is. John the Baptist then says, "Here is the Lamb of God." And he says that to who? Andrew and John the Apostle, who are disciples of John the Baptist, who then follow. Jesus then goes and picks up Nathanael and Philip. He encounters Peter, doesn't call him yet. We know that's true because the calling of Peter isn't until Luke 5, which is in Galilee. John 1, where this all takes place, is in Jordan beyond the Bethany. Not the same incident. Can't be. Then Jesus goes up through to Cana, changes the water to wine, comes over to Capernaum, back down to Passover, thank you. Runs into these people who are worshiping as a miracle worker. Nothing's going on in Galilee yet. Nothing's going on in Galilee. Then Nicodemus comes out and says, "Hey, what's going on here?" Jesus says you have to be born again. Then he goes and he sees John the Baptist again, who's having this robust ministry. But Jesus is starting to gain some attention, right? And so now Jesus is gaining some attention from the Pharisees, and they say, and Jesus leaves because of this. Not because John the Baptist is arrested, but because he's ministering alongside of John the Baptist. And remember, we saw this where the disciples of John the Baptist are starting to kind of get jealous for John the Baptist's sake. And then John the Baptist says, "No, I have to decrease and he must increase." There was that whole event. John the Baptist is still baptizing here. The very statement in John 4 says, "Had heard that Jesus was making and baptizing more disciples than John." That implies John is baptizing people, which means he's not arrested yet, which means it's not the same departure as these other synoptic records. So then he goes back up to Galilee through Samaria and comes again to Cana. All before the Galilean ministry. And this is why there's been confusion, because everybody wants to force this in there. We've all been taught, well, this is somehow in the synoptic ministry. Why does it say again? You know, there's this confusion. At least this is how I see it. And I very much welcome anybody that has a different opinion and has questions about how this fits. But I have yet to come across a reason as to why this doesn't make sense to me.
Well,
Yes.
Well, we're on the subject of putting events into some kind of a understandable chronological sequence. Where would you put, he told his mother my time has not yet come at the marriage feast of Cana. When do you think his time would actually come? Is that when he read the passage from Isaiah in the synagogue?
In Luke 4? Yes. I think that is a critical piece, because when he reads in Luke 4, goes into the synagogue, and we'll get there, but when he reads that piece of Isaiah and he says, today this is fulfilled, this is the beginning of something new, which is this Galilean ministry. In Matthew 4:17 on, which means there's something after Jesus. So, you cannot remove the second sign of John, like we spoke about. So anyhow, Cana, again, we see this. This is the water to wine. This is where he comes, and now this is the second sign, and this is in Galilee. So zoom out really briefly for history here. Herod the Great dies in 4 BC. His kingdom is divided among his 3 sons, and we kind of went over this a while ago. But anyhow, you have the one son, Archelaus, and he is going to be the king of Judea from basically 4 BC to 6 AD. And then he's removed by Rome, and Judea becomes a Roman province ruled by Roman prefects. And remember how when Mary and Joseph are coming back from Egypt, and they're coming back up through into Israel, and they avoid this section. They just avoid it because this guy here is a pretty bad ruler in Judea, and to the point where the Romans come in and they remove him. They're like, this guy is going to be a problem. So anyways, then you have, but he's kind of the first son there, and then Herod Antipas is the king of Galilee and Perea, and he's not the king, but he's the tetrarch. Thank you.
Ruler of 4 regions. There's 4 regions, 4 rulers, and he's one of the 4. That's why it's called a tetrarch.
Oh, okay. All right. And then you have Philip, and he's going to rule these northeast territories, but this is a different Philip than Antipas's brother's wife. So then you have Cana and Capernaum are in Galilee. The nobleman would have most likely been from the court of Herod Antipas. So the nobleman abandons the power of the king's court and seeks Jesus. He knows that this court is not going to save his son. So the question is this: is the nobleman an example of shallow sign-seeking faith that grows, or is he already believing and simply learning the depth of Jesus' authority? So this is kind of the questions that I think we have to ask. So who is Jesus rebuking here? This is important because in my Bible, I don't know what everybody else has, but mine says you people, but the people is in italics here. And the reason that that's placed there is because in the Greek, this is a plural word that's used. It's you, plural, you people, all of you. He's not just speaking to this nobleman. He's talking to you people.
You all.
You all, yeah, y'all.
All y'all.
All y'all.
All y'all.
That'd be an interesting translation. Could you imagine reading that in a translation? And Jesus said, all y'all. So anyways, so the people of verse 45 who were accepting Jesus as a miracle worker because of the signs he performed in Jerusalem. That's who he's addressing, along with this man. And Jesus did not offer himself like we've talked about. This is why we cannot separate the second sign from verses 43 and 45, who are explicitly tied back to John 2:23. I hope that makes sense. I hope that understands. That's at least how I understand this. We can't be inserting another moment here. This flows better. So what kind of faith here? So he is clearly seeking Jesus, this nobleman. He begs the Lord, which reveals he clearly believes that Jesus can heal him. But notice this. He went to him and was imploring him to come down and heal his son. This is important. He believes in Jesus' power, but assumes Jesus must be present. This reveals the nobleman believes in the miraculous ability of Jesus' signs, but does not understand his sovereign authority. So the nobleman initially sees Jesus as this miracle worker, but not as a sovereign Lord. This miracle is more than healing. It is healing by the spoken word of Jesus across distance. That's why this is a sign. It's way more than just a healing that takes place. This is the first time that a healing takes place outside of proximity. The Lord just speaks it and it happens. That's why John records this as a sign. So Jesus heals the son from a different location. What is evident is that Jesus is forcing reliance on his word, not his signs. And this is a theme that John has been developing over and over again in this book. He is challenging the very thing the people are worshiping, signs. That's the very thing that he's challenging here, and he says it plainly. Up until this point, this type of miracle healing from a distance has not yet been performed. Jesus does not go down to heal the son. He simply speaks a word. The sign demonstrates his authority, not only over life, but without proximity. The nobleman and those present must adjust their theology, that Jesus is simply a traveling miracle worker that must be present to perform these signs. He is the sovereign Lord with supreme and complete authority. So the response here is quite telling. The man believed the word that Jesus spoke to him and started off. So I think it reveals several things. The nobleman does not ask for verification. He doesn't sit there and ask for another sign. He's not sitting there asking Jesus to prove it. Okay? And he doesn't stay there waiting for confirmation in case he has to return, which I think is interesting when you think about it. He's traveled all the way from Capernaum to Cana, seeking out Jesus. Please come down and heal my son. Come, you can see the urgency here. And so he doesn't stay and wait for this confirmation. He doesn't wait for somebody to come to him and say, maybe I need to go back to Jesus just to make sure. No, he just leaves. So we can basically see this growth in real time. He initially comes seeing Jesus as a miracle worker, saying, come down here, come down here. But now you see that he graduates to, I trust your word alone. It is a growth in his faith without a sign. Now it's signless.
Deity too. It's an affirmation of his deity.
Yeah. Yep. And that's Jesus' whole point here. So the text communicates that the nobleman left and returned calmly. He doesn't rush home. He's not sprinting down the road to see if what Jesus said was true. And he knew it was true. He calmly leaves. He's in no panic. All right? What if he missed his son's death? He would be in a rush, right? We can all agree here that if you went up to this and you're trying to see this and you're like, I'm in a rush, will you please come down here and do this? My son's about to die. You think he'd be like dead sprint back to Capernaum to see if this took place. Did I miss my son's death? Oh my gosh, what's going on here? No, he just leaves. He's calmly walking down the road. The delay that takes place indicates he probably spent the night on the way home somewhere. And I think that what we're seeing here is a settled trust that the man had in Jesus. That's the sign.
So he's saved.
Yeah. Yep.
What about Nicodemus?
Nicodemus becomes saved later.
He becomes saved later.
Doesn't he help Joseph of Arimathea take the body of Christ down
Yep.
from the cross?
And he's also plunked down enough money to buy 100 pounds of spices
Yeah.
for the burial.
So then we see that he himself believed in his whole household. The sign produces faith. And this is an evangelistic sign that generated belief. The sign is not simply a healing, but that the word of the Lord carries sovereign authority, even across distance. So he has authority over life, he has authority over space, and it is the authority of the spoken word of Christ. So this fits beautifully into John's bigger theme, which is John chapter 20, verse 31. This is John's theme here. John 20:31. We see, but these have been written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that believing you may have life in his name. So the nobleman is this prototype believer that John is anticipating in the future. Okay, John is writing to individuals that are in a post-resurrection, post-ascension period. They do not see Jesus. The people that believe in Jesus after his ascension do not see Jesus. Well, I mean, the apostles and those that were there may have seen Jesus, but the 500 but you understand what I'm saying here. Those who believe like us now in the church age, we believe, but we haven't seen Jesus. We haven't seen these signs. This anticipates the Lord's statements, which John records later. And what did Jesus say? Blessed are they who did not see and yet believed. The nobleman is an early example of this belief without seeing. He leaves. He believes in the word of Christ and he leaves calmly. So what's John doing here? Notice this. These have been written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that believing you may have life in his name. John is recording these signs, but does not expect his readers to ever see them. He is placing authority in the word of Jesus. The nobleman believed in the spoken words from Christ himself. His readers must believe the written word that records these things. This second sign is powerful because it is more than healing. It's healing at a distance, and it's about developing and exercising faith, even when Jesus is not physically present. That's what John's entire point is, according to John. I'm writing these things down so that you might believe in Jesus. And then Jesus explicitly says, blessed are those who don't see these signs and yet believe. That's the whole point of John's book. Well, maybe not the whole point, but it's certainly a major one here. It literally mirrors, this miracle literally mirrors every believer after the ascension. We must walk by faith, not by sight. That's I think, what is being suggested here. John and Jesus have consistently distinguished an attraction to what Jesus does and a submission to who Jesus is. They consistently distinguish these things. John 2:23, Jesus doesn't accept these miracles. John 4, believing in signs. John 6, as we'll see, they follow him because they loved the bread that he was giving them, but it wasn't true belief. There's a big difference in faith that is anchored in who Jesus is versus what Jesus does. Big difference. Our faith is not a negotiation with Jesus. It's a submission to who he is, and a willful submission to that occurs freely after being born again. So, John makes this clear, so that you may believe who he is. John is writing so that we may believe in Jesus, not just what he does. That's the end of John 4.
What is the ramification of all this to those today who are in the charismatic signs and wonders movement? What does it mean for them if you confront them? Because ultimately, there's a miracle, but if it's a sign also, which John repeatedly calls these things signs. But if you just believe in the miracle, the sign, it just stops there. It's not a sign. In their mind, it's not a sign of anything.
Yeah.
But if you understand it as a sign, then you understand the purpose of it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And Jesus, when he did miracles, everything was immediate.
Yeah. Yeah.
Would you repeat that?
Everything that Jesus did. Yeah, everything that Jesus did was immediate. It happens right now. It wasn't like the what goes on today.
Right.
So do you guys want to try and push through a little bit? All right. So again here, all right, well, we'll just introduce this. In the harmonies, again, we're going back to this. Now we're jumping all the way forward to section 50, okay? And I'm going to introduce this. Section 50 in all the harmonies is going to be placed within the section of the authority over the Sabbath day, okay? And so, and certainly in John 5, the occurrences during the Sabbath, but really I think in John 5 there needs to be two movements here. This is way, way, way bigger than a Sabbath violation here. Movement 1 through, which is going to be verses 1 through 15, and really this is the sign that reveals divine authority. And so then you have movement 2, which is going to be the following verses, which is really, I think, going to be, characterized as the Son who is equal with the Father. And so the Sabbath controversy becomes the vehicle or the occasion for divine revelation and self-disclosure. So authority over the Sabbath is true in this sense, but it's limited because much more is happening here. Yes, this conflict begins with a Sabbath healing, but the Jews are not seeking to kill Jesus because of a Sabbath violation. That's not what's going on in John 5. And so, because he was not only was breaking the Sabbath, but was also calling God his own Father, making himself equal with God. So the Sabbath day may be the catalyst or the occasion, but equal Father is the real issue here. That's the issue in John 5. John 5 explodes into this divine identity declaration, not a Sabbath debate. And so we can see, I'm suggesting that John 5 naturally flows from John 4, okay? We don't have to introduce any other sections here, because in John 5, as we see here, there's another feast, and it comes back down into Jerusalem, which is the location that John 5 takes place in. And
So this feast, would this have been, what, a Pentecost celebration?
I personally think, and this is all opinion. We do not know what the feast is. We'll never know what the feast is. It's all speculation. I think that it's the Feast of Pentecost, and I have reasons for that, but I can tell you that I'm very confident it's not the Feast of Passover. And so we'll get into that in just a moment. So here we can see that there's a major difference between the John 5 Sabbath and the Synoptics. So yes, this can be included within the Synoptics that talk about the authority over the Sabbath, because this is demonstrating the authority over the Sabbath. It is the occasion that this takes place. But the Synoptics, really, their issues are interpretations over the Sabbath law, or they're talking about mercy versus legalism and what is lawful, what is work. That's what's going on a little bit smaller scale in the Synoptics, but John 5 is completely different. In John 5, the issues are equality with the Father. The issues are life in himself. The issues are Jesus has the authority to judge. And this results in an open hostility grounded in Christology of who Christ is, not how he's interpreting the law. And so really, I think it's maybe a good way to understand that the Synoptics are presenting, really have these lordship Sabbath controversies. And I'm not trying to suggest that means that they are not important, but there's a different emphasis here that's taking place in the Synoptics than in John 5. Both are important, but they're completely different emphasis that are taking place, okay? So John 5 presents the Son's divine authority and equality with the Father. John 5 is the climax of this early revelatory phase of Jesus. John has been organizing his material, aggressive revelation of Jesus' divine authority. John 5 naturally fits as the climax to this progressive revelation, especially John 1 through 4 that illustrate this escalating Christological revelation. And then John 5 ends with this basically legal case as to why this is true, why everything that's been going on, everything that John's been documenting and writing about Jesus claiming to be equal with the Father is actually true. And he makes this case in his witness. So, all of this naturally fits before the synoptic timeline begins. This is the culmination of the pre-synoptic revelation that has taken place. So, to force this into synoptic Sabbath controversies seems unnecessary because there's much more going on in this issue here than just these Sabbath controversies. Why the Sabbath matters here? So really, just briefly here, the Sabbath is important. Okay, I'm not trying to overlook that, but I just built all these traditions around the Sabbath day to try and protect it. They built all these fences. Remember, we talked about building fences around the law so that they don't break these, they don't cross over this fence, which will prohibit them from breaking the law, which will then send them into another captivity and so on. And so they've built up all these fences. And so they've done that same thing with the Sabbath as well. And so the Sabbath is super important. And the Pharisees certainly elevated it to a point that was not what it was intended to be. So the miracle here in John 5, 1 through 9, John only explicitly numbers the first two signs. After those, the signs are inferred. So when we're talking about John and his 7 signs, we have to understand that John's actually only numbered 2 signs. We are inferring that the other ones are signs, and we number them accordingly, but I think that we do that for our ability to sort of get our hands wrapped around a bigger picture of what John's doing and why he's recording these specific events, because they are major signs that Jesus performed. But the interpreters seem to organize the gospel around these 7 major signs here. So after these things, and we'll end on this here, but John 5:1 is crucial. So John 5:1 says, after these things that just took place in Cana, there was a feast of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. So we see here that this is an unnamed feast. And John, when he mentions the Passover, he's very deliberate and he's explicit. Multiple times, I think, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 8 times or so, he mentions the Passover explicitly. This is the Passover of the Jews. When the Passover of the Jews, we went down for the Passover and so on. So when John means Passover, he says Passover. But here he does not say Passover. He deliberately doesn't call it the Passover. It is interpretively weak to state that this is a Passover. All right? And the burden of proof is on them. If you're going to claim that this is a Passover, the burden of proof is on those who claim this is the Passover, because you have to prove that this is a Passover if you're going to claim it. Why do this matters? Because counting Passover is how we determine the length of Christ's ministry. There's only 3 Passovers in the biblical timeline of Christ's ministry. There's only 3. Okay? You have the Passover at his death, to the second Passover, which is John 6, which is marked basically around the same period of time as Jesus feeding the 5,000, which is marked basically after John the Baptist's death. That's the second Passover, calendar year 2. Second Passover to first Passover. What's the first Passover marker? Nicodemus, we could say. Nicodemus is right there.
Cleansing the temple.
Cleansing the temple, yes. The possession of the first temple. Thank you, perfect. Great marker, right? That's calendar year 2. What happens before that first Passover? First sign at Cana, temptation, baptism, calling of the 4, encounter with Peter. All of that takes place prior to the first Passover. That's 2.5 years.
Interactions with John.
Interactions with John. Yep, John the Baptist, thank you. So, that's 2.5 years. And I don't know why we have to force this ministry into a 3.5 year period, 3 to 3.5 year period. We just don't. I've been trying to force it into 3.5 years, or 3 years, but it's just not there, in my opinion. And like I said again, I'll welcome anybody that says that has something else, but I don't see it. And the reason that people want to, or that everybody seems to want to make a 3.5 year ministry, is they're trying to solve what is called, what I will categorize as a geographical dilemma. Because between John 5 and John 6, you have Jesus in Jerusalem doing the things he's doing in John 5, and then immediately he's in Galilee in John 6 with the feeding of the 5,000. And so there's this geographical dilemma that takes place that is solved by adding another Passover. And the reason that they add that Passover is because the accusation of those who hold to a 2 to 2.5 year period, which is, I'm just going to frankly tell you, the minority. I actually don't know who does. I've not read a single person that says that we should be adopting a 2.5 year ministry. I've read, but the reason that we shouldn't adopt a 2.5 year ministry is because they see that those who say Jesus' ministry is 2 to 2.5 years say we have to flip John 5 and John 6, and this is Honer. Well, because if we flip John 5 and John 6, John 6 takes place in Galilee, which follows right on the heels of John 4, and so it naturally seems to flow if you're just harmonizing things, trying to harmonize stuff. But then John 5 takes place in Jerusalem, so you would flip that and go back into Jerusalem. Well, the problem is that's not how John reads, and that's not at all what I'm suggesting. I'm suggesting that we just read the book of John the way that it was written, and then we can see that this is not a Passover. This is just a simple, well, not a simple feast, but a feast that takes place in Jerusalem right after the nobleman's son that he moves back to.
It seems odd that they want to conflate that early heart of Jesus' experiences, I'll say, with the synoptic accounts.
Yeah.
And then they have to add some time later to stretch out for
Yeah.
that total
All these
time.
all these events to take place to be able to account for these geographical dilemmas. And I think that when we just read it the way that it was written, it flows much better. And we anchor ourselves on known chronological timeline facts. And the fact is John the Baptist's arrest. If we anchor ourselves in that, which the Bible explicitly says, which gives us confidence that we can anchor ourselves in this, then everything seems to flow way, way better, way more natural. Yes?
So Christian, then are you saying, if I understand, that when the synoptic gospels talk about Jesus going to Galilee, would this be Jesus' third time to Galilee.
Yep, third time to Galilee. This is his third departure. Third departure. So his first departure is after his temptation, comes back. Second departure is after he's gaining attention with the Pharisees, through Samaria, comes back. Third departure is right after, well, I'm not even going to be dogmatic about this. It's definitely after John 4. I think you can make strong case that John 5 is after, or is before this too, but it doesn't really matter. You can place John 5 around that same time, but the records show that he departs to Galilee or retreats to Galilee, which implies that he's not in Galilee, which tells you that in the John 5 occasion, he's not in Galilee. So it's an opportunity that maybe John the Baptist was arrested right at John 5 or right around John 5, which would make sense, but we don't need that. But it's right around in this time period when Jesus is outside of Galilee, he's left, he's in Jerusalem. It seems to make sense to me, but that's where I'd put it.
He spent time in the Galilee at Capernaum because that was sort of his central operating area, wasn't it? I mean, isn't that where the upper room was?
No, that's in Jerusalem.
Is that in Jerusalem?
Referring to is the synoptic timeline. Jesus has not spent significant time in Capernaum yet. He's spent in John 2, after the wedding at Cana, he goes up to Capernaum with his mother and his brothers, and they go up to Capernaum, and they stayed there a few days, is what it says. And then they come back to the first Passover. So he hasn't spent a lot of time in Capernaum yet.
Not at this point.
But that's where he sets up his main ministry. Anyways, I've probably created more questions than answered anything, but hopefully this helps. And I think as we see this, it might flow well. So anyways, that's what I've got. We'll pick up next time. Thank you.